He came up too fast and he came up shouting. The other men on the boat thought he had hit nitrogen narcosis at 60 meters. His name was Elias Stadiatis, and he had spent 15 years sponge diving the Mediterranean. He had not made this mistake before. What Stadiatis kept shouting in Semiote Greek was that there were corpses on the seafloor. Naked corpses, dozens of them, 60 meters down. The captain, Dimitrios Kondos, suited up himself. He surfaced an hour later with a single bronze arm. The corpses were marble statues. Stadiatis and Kondos had found the wreck of a Roman merchant ship sunk around 70 years before the birth of Christ, loaded with Greek art bound for an Italian port. What they had not found yet was the small bronze lump they would bring up the following spring and set aside as unimportant. The bronze lump was an analog computer. This is the cold archive. The wreck lay about 12 nautical miles from the small island of Antikythera, in the strait between Crete and the Peloponnese, in 60 meters of water. The ship had been a Roman merchantman, dated by its cargo to roughly 70 to 60 BCE. It had gone down in a storm. It had taken its cargo with it. The Greek government authorized a full excavation in November 1901. It ran for 10 months. Sponge divers in canvas suits and brass helmets made 50-meter descents without protective dive tables. One of them, Georgios Kritikos, died of decompression sickness. The cargo was brought up piece by piece and shipped to Athens. They brought up bronze statues. They brought up marble torsos. They brought up amphorae sealed with pitch. They brought up gold jewelry, oil lamps, a corroded sundial, ceramics, and one ugly bronze object that had cracked open in transit. The object was cataloged as a single number, set on a shelf in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and forgotten for the next 50 years.
The fragment bears the appearance of an astronomical instrument. The mechanism would have been driven by gears. I have proposed this to the Athens Archaeological Society, who do not find it credible.
Stais had been right. The bronze object was an astronomical instrument. Nobody at the Athens Archaeological Society in 1902 believed that an analog computer driven by precision gears could have existed in the ancient world. The bronze lump went onto a shelf marked unidentified and waited for somebody who would believe it. The somebody was an English physicist named Derek de Solla Price. By 1951, he was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and he had become aware of the Antikythera fragment through a footnote. He traveled to Athens. He held the largest fragment up to the museum window. Through the corrosion, he could see faintly the regular pattern of teeth that meant a gear. Price spent the next 10 years studying the mechanism. In 1974, he published Gears from the Greeks in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society. It was 70 pages long. It established for the first time that the Antikythera fragment was an analog astronomical computer, manufactured in Greece around 100 BCE, using a level of precision gearing that should not have existed for 1,400 more years. Price had been right. The community of historians of science did not at first agree. They thought he had overread the corrosion. It would take another 30 years and a custom-built X-ray scanner to prove him correct. The custom-built X-ray scanner was named the Blade Runner. It was designed by a British engineering firm specifically for the Antikythera Mechanism. It weighed 8 tons. The Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, an international team led by the astronomer Mike Edmonds and the documentary filmmaker Tony Freeth, used it to scan all 82 surviving fragments of the mechanism in 3 dimensions in 2005.
For the first time, we could see what the inside of the mechanism actually was. The gears Price had inferred from surface features were really there. There were also more of them than he had counted.
Freeth's team published in Nature in 2006. The mechanism contained 37 gears. 30 of them were intact in some form. 7 were missing but could be inferred from the gear engagement marks they had left on their neighbors. The mechanism was operated by turning a small hand crank. Each turn of the crank advanced a calendrical year. The back of the mechanism had 2 large dials. The upper dial was a spiral covering 235 months. The Metonic cycle, a Babylonian astronomical calendar that brings the lunar months and the solar years into alignment every 19 years. Turn the crank and a pointer moved through the months. The mechanism could tell you which lunar month any solar year would begin in, 50 years ahead. The lower back dial was the Saros, an 18-year cycle known to Babylonian astronomers that predicts when solar and lunar eclipses will occur. The dial was divided into months. Each eclipse-bearing month was marked with a small symbol indicating the predicted eclipse. The mechanism could tell its operator in around 100 BCE which lunar eclipse would happen 40 years from when he turned the crank, and roughly which hour. Within the Saros dial was a smaller subsidiary dial that tracked the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic athletic games: Olympic, Pythian, Nemean, Isthmian. The mechanism could tell you which games were happening in any year of the cycle. It is one of the few archaeological objects that has confirmed the precise sequence of these games as it was understood by Greeks of the period. The front of the mechanism is mostly destroyed. What survives is enough to confirm that the front face displayed the position of the sun and moon in the zodiac on a circular calendar of 365 days, with a small lunar phase ball that rotated to show the moon's appearance. There are inscriptions on the surviving front plate fragments referring to the planets. The planetary display itself is gone. In 2021, Freeth and his team published a complete reconstruction of the planetary display in Scientific Reports. Using gear ratios derived from ancient astronomical texts, they proposed a gear train for Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Each planet had its own pointer, advancing through the zodiac at the rate that planet appears to move from the perspective of a viewer on Earth. The Antikythera Mechanism is the earliest known analog computer. It was built in Greece somewhere between 150 and 50 BCE. It uses 37 gears in a wooden housing the size of a shoebox. It does eclipse prediction, calendrical tracking, planetary position modeling, and 4-year cycle reckoning. The next machine of comparable complexity in the surviving historical record is an astronomical clock made in 1415 in Padua by Giovanni Dondi. A machine this complex cannot be the first of its kind. The skill required to design it implies a school of mathematicians. The precision required to manufacture it implies a workshop with prior models. The Antikythera Mechanism should not be unique. It should be representative of a tradition.
For Marcellus brought back to Rome only one sphere from the spoils of Syracuse. It was made by Archimedes. By turning a single crank, the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 planets could be reproduced exactly.
Cicero wrote that in 54 BCE, he claimed to have seen the device himself in the home of the Roman polymath Gallus, who could operate it to predict eclipses. The sphere had been built by Archimedes of Syracuse about 200 years earlier, around 220 BCE. It had been taken to Rome as plunder after the fall of Syracuse in 212. Cicero also wrote that his own teacher, Posidonius of Rhodes, had built an even more elaborate astronomical mechanism around 100 BCE. The dates align. The Antikythera shipwreck was a Roman merchantman that had loaded at an Aegean port and was headed for Italy. Posidonius was based on Rhodes. The mechanism may have been built in the workshop tradition that produced it. The mechanism may not be unique. It may simply be the one that survived. Hero of Alexandria wrote in the 1st century CE about gear-driven automata, water clocks, theatrical machinery, and small-scale astronomical instruments. The skill set existed and was passed down. The school did not vanish. It diversified into other engineering applications. None of those instruments has survived. Almost nothing else survived because bronze was an expensive material. Broken or obsolete instruments were melted down and reused. Wooden housings rotted. Of the things made by the Greek workshop tradition of precision astronomy, what we have is what was buried in the mud at the bottom of the Aegean Sea, sealed away from the recycling economies of the next 2,000 years.
The Antikythera Mechanism survived because it sank. Without the Roman shipwreck, we would have nothing.
The mechanism is on display in Athens. The display case is small. The fragments are arranged in approximately their original positions inside the wooden housing. The housing itself rotted away within decades of the wreck. The bronze gears are what survived. The bronze gears were what could not be melted down because they were never recovered. The most important display on the Antikythera Mechanism, the part that would have shown the positions of the 5 planets, is the part that is mostly destroyed. We are inferring what the operator most wanted to see by reverse engineering what is left of the gears that drove it. The thing the Greeks built that we most want to look at, we cannot look at. The shipwrecks not yet excavated. The Hellenistic workshops whose products were melted down. The Posidonian school on Rhodes. The thing that Archimedes made that we know existed because Cicero saw it. None of those instruments has survived. The skill that built them did exist. We have one of the products. The Antikythera Mechanism is, so far, the only object of its kind that anyone has ever found. It is also, almost certainly, not the only one that was ever made. Thursday's case. Adelaide, Australia. December 1st, 1948. 6:30 in the morning. A young couple walking the esplanade at Somerton Beach find a well-dressed man propped against the seawall. He is dead. The labels have been cut out of his clothes. In a pocket sewn by hand into his trousers is a piece of paper torn from the last page of a book of Persian poetry. 2 words. Tamam shud. It is ended. The Somerton Man. Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. See you then.